So here's my takeaway on Baker Mayfield. Darnold and Baker Mayfield. I was a Darnold fan over a Baker fan. Darnold was a bigger athlete. He was stronger. He was more athletic, and I thought he was a better guy. I think all of those are true. The question about Darnold was his delivery. Slow, methodical, not Tebow slow, but just inaccurate, kind of reckless. That's proven to be true. Baker Mayfield was considered a better thrower, but he was a two-time walk-on, chip on his shoulder. In those instances, he's become exactly what we thought. But he has a better delivery system. He gets rid of the ball quicker. He's got a little more zip on it. And historically, he's been a little bit more accurate, although his accuracy has dipped in the last year. My takeaway is Darnold and Baker Mayfield, regardless of who's right or what do you think, we know what they are. There is no quarterback in the last 10 years that has come into the league. And after 4 years, we radically change our mind. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. Name one. Very early, we said with Lamar Jackson, whoa, but we had issues how he threw the ball, and can you play from behind when you're more runner than thrower? That's what we think today. People often use Josh Allen as an example. Boy, he struggled in year one. Yeah, he wasn't overly accurate, but he was still 6'6" and leaping over people with the best arm arguably in the NFL. There is no way you could look at Josh Allen in year one and bail on him. He was simply too talented. He was literally too talented. He would be like a great wide receiver that had the drops. You're going to coach the drops out of him. But if you're running a 4.3, you're 6'4", you run great routes, you just have a drop issue, nobody's bailing on you, okay? Nobody was bailing on Josh Allen. It's different. Baker's small. Sam's big, but he's not strikingly big. He didn't have a great arm. He's not wildly mobile. The bottom line with Baker and Darnold, we know what they are. One's a little snarky and immature, limitations with size, limitations athletically, Baker. One of them's a good guy, pretty athletic, decent size, but his delivery system stinks. He just gets rid of the ball slowly. And that half beat that works in the Pac-12 kills you in the NFL. So what I've found through years of doing this for a living, everybody wants to be right. A lot of me was right on Baker. A lot of me was wrong on Sam Darnold. But the truth is, we know what they are. If you're clinging to the Sam Darnold's going to be a franchise quarterback and a good one, it's not going to happen. If you're clinging to Baker, he's going to prove Cowherd wrong. You're wrong. Cleveland had excellent offensive personnel, and he was never spectacular with it. Carolina is a bit of a mess. They had the 31st ranked offensive line. I like Christian McCaffrey, but he's never healthy. Robbie Anderson's good, but not spectacular. And we don't even think he likes Baker Mayfield. Matt Rule, who knows if he can coach at the NFL level? So in our insistence to be right, I was right on Baker, I was wrong on Darnold, but we all know the answer now on both. Neither is good enough to carry a franchise to multiple playoff wins. Baker won a playoff game. The Browns had the highest rated offensive line in the entire National Football League and the best running back duo. We know what they are. It's time to stop trying to prove each other wrong. Dear Colin, did you see Aaron Rodgers' new tattoo? The internet is buzzing about it. What did you make of it? Well, it's cryptic. We're not sure what it is or what Aaron's trying to say. So it's perfectly on brand because that's how I feel about Aaron Rodgers. He talks cryptically and he's calculated and he's passive aggressive. Listen, Aaron is a guy that likes to say things and leave us all hanging, right? Like he's got the magic key to unlock the answer box. And that's what this tattoo is. Nobody can figure out what the fuck it is. And nobody can quite figure out what the hell Aaron Rodgers is ever really truly thinking. I'm going to retire. Maybe I don't retire. I could play a year. I could play 3 years. That tattoo is the most on-brand tattoo. Aaron is in a constant race to show you how unique and different he is. That Aaron Rodgers tattoo looks like a Kyrie Irving Instagram post. This is interesting, Joel. About 3 months ago, Mike Bone and I were on the phone. I was in my backyard, and he was talking about the challenges of Southern California. It's a very distracted market. And, he was saying, hey, do you have any ideas? And I said, you can't play Rice in LA. When Pete Carroll was here, there was no NFL. There was no LAFC. The Dodgers weren't as dominant. The Clippers were a joke. I'm like, the world's changed. You can't play Rice. I said, what I would do, Mike, I would call Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan, Ohio State, and I would have 1 to 2 home and homes every year, Big Ten, because the Pac-12 is so weak. Lincoln Riley's not going to be challenged by year 2. He's just not going to be challenged on a weekly basis. And it was funny. And there were other things talked about during the call, but we were just talking. Mike's always called me and just asked questions, LA. Sure. And so when the moment happened and I got the call on USC moving to the Big Ten, my thought was, well, I don't know if he was teasing me, but I wasn't shocked by it at all. Were you?
No. Well, let me initially, yes, because I had not heard anything. And normally, and you know this, you and I talk about this all the time. Like when there are things going on, like you hear little ripples, right? Like little things like, oh, okay, that would be interesting. This was, I felt like very well kept by everyone involved. And so when I initially heard it, I was surprised and I was shocked. And then 3 minutes later, after that wears off, it's like, well, yeah, of course this happened. This was, and I think if you really have any semblance of 30,000 foot view, this was inevitable in some way. So to me, it comes down to, and the conversation, I'm sure what he was talking to you about is economics and exposure. And in the Pac-12, that had degraded both of those things drastically since the beginning of the century, really, since the Leinart Bush days at USC, when the Pac-10 at the time was a viable and very healthy and great conference. And it has deteriorated to a point that it has become a punchline. And I've thrown that line out there and people think it's unfair, but it is fair because the Pac-12 is literally a hashtag now called Pac-12 After Dark. Like no one watches them play.
Right.
And when you look at the economics of where the SEC is about to go with their media rights deal and where the Big Ten is about to go with their media rights deal and what's on the horizon for the conferences like the Big 12, the Pac-12, the economics weren't even close. Those conferences were going to start to double up the others in terms of the revenue distribution per school. And you can't sit in that situation. So in some ways, USC's hands were totally forced. And I know that I'm going to talk a lot about this in terms of USC's, because this was USC driven. UCLA is along for the ride. And I know that they'll bristle at that, but they are. And that's kind of the truth.
Well, I've said this before. It's easy to beat up on Tom Hansen and Larry Scott. And I don't think either was a visionary as a Pac-10 or Pac-12 commissioner. But there's something I've tried to tell my friends for 20 years, because I've lived in all 4 corners of the country. Mm-hmm. The Pac-12 is at a disadvantage.
Sure.
Seattle, San Francisco, Phoenix, Los Angeles, Denver/Boulder. A lot of these teams are in professional sports markets.
That's right.
SEC's not, Big 12's not, Big 10's not. So USC and UCLA, University of Washington, Cal, Stanford, Arizona State are competing against pro teams. Mm-hmm. It is hard to create the fervor and the interest when there's a game tomorrow with professional players, often in the same stadium or same area code or vicinity. And so it doesn't mean as much out here. I've noticed since the NFL arrived in Los Angeles, UCLA USC, read the LA Times, listen to Sports Talk Radio. They're not on it.
Sure.
They're just not a topic at all.
I do still believe, and I think you'll agree with this. I still believe that USC has that potential. USC captures the heart of LA, maybe more so than any other team that's here, even professionally. Maybe other than the Lakers.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm being too college centric, but boy, when the USC is rolling, they desperately love it when USC gets going here. It's everything about it, the sunglasses on the band, the Coliseum, the scene. I still believe that USC can be kind of the focal point of the sports world in their market, and no other Pac-12 school can really do that.
Yeah, no, I do agree. Lincoln Riley, it's funny because I got a lot of this. Whoa, Lincoln Riley doesn't want this. Mm-hmm. But when Lincoln Riley took that Sunday morning call with Rick Caruso, Carol Folt, Mike Bone, I don't know every word of it, but I do know they sold him on moonshots and the Olympics and big and expansion and playing the best. So he's got 2 years to load up this roster, 2 more transfer portal cycles, 2 more recruiting classes. So by the time he gets into the Big Ten, this team will be ready to play against anybody. Sure. I think at home against Ohio State, maybe not in Columbus, but they'll be able to go toe to toe with everybody else in that conference. So, when I look at the Lincoln Riley situation, and I say to myself, I don't know if he knew going forward, but he's not a guy to me. I think he left Oklahoma because a reality set in. Oklahoma is decreasing in terms of viability, the state, for high school recruits. Texas has oil money, Sark and Jimbo Fisher, harder to pry players out. He's moving to the SEC and going to go up against SEC schools that have been recruiting those high schools for 100 years. Yeah. And I think he looked in the mirror and thought, I got to get to a state with more players.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be harder and harder with the NIL to pry away players from Texas, oil money. There's just more money in Texas than Oklahoma. So that's always been my takeaway why he left. He just looked at the reality of his program, Texas, the SEC, and thought, I got to get to a bigger state. It could be a Florida school. It could be a Texas school. It could be a California school. If Kirby Smart was struggling, it could be the Georgia job. But I got to get to a state that is mine, where the NIL money generated by my state can compete.
I think that there's only 4 schools in the country that can open up their back door and be within an hour's drive, not flight, drive of a recruiting base that could finish number 1 in the country. I think it's Miami. I think it's Georgia. I think it's probably LSU or Texas, or a combination of those 2, and then USC.
Yeah.
So, and maybe you throw A&M in there because of the proximity to Texas. But my point is that it is a really small number, and it does not include Oklahoma. It doesn't even include Ohio State. They've got to be a national recruiter. It doesn't even include Alabama. They can't sit in Alabama. They've got to go out. They've got to win battles in Texas and Louisiana and Georgia. I mean, you know this, right? And so it's really made what Nick Saban has done even more remarkable. But USC is one of those places where you can open up the back door. You can get in your car. You can drive south on the 5 for an hour. You can drive north on the 5 for an hour, and you can have a roster that can finish as the number 1 class in the country. That's the truth of it. I think that was a big reason why. And I think that he saw, and I'm going to get crushed for this, but I don't think Oklahoma is totally tapped out, but I think he saw how perfect it had to be in order for Oklahoma to win a national championship. Yep. And I think that USC probably has more wiggle room in that because of what I was talking about in recruiting. And that is not a knock on Oklahoma. So I want to be abundantly clear here for everybody that listening to this. I believe Oklahoma is a top-tier blue-chip program in college football. I think that they will win. I like Brent Venables a lot. I think they can win at the top level. I believe they'll win SEC championships. in the future. And I think that they still and can win a national championship. I do believe that it's harder there than it can be at USC. And I believe that even more so now after this move with USC going to the Big Ten.
I was told by somebody who I trust, the Big Ten will only add Notre Dame. And I think it makes a lot of sense. I also think
I would agree with that, by the way. I'll jump in. I completely agree with that. I don't think they expand anymore unless it's Notre Dame.
I agree. I think it's harder and harder to be independent. Let's touch on that because Notre Dame was independent forever, then conjoined with the ACC half the way. Why can't you be independent and viable anymore? Explain that.
Oh, that's a great question.
The revenue's too great from conferences?
Yes, because there's only 6 or 7 games that you're selling as an independent. You've got to find the revenue out of your road games. Okay, when you're in a conference, so Ohio State, let's just bring up Ohio State and Notre Dame. Okay, that's the difference. Ohio State is essentially in the Big Ten selling both their home games and their away games. So they're maximizing their brand regardless of where they're playing. Notre Dame doesn't do that. So Notre Dame is maximizing their brand in their home games because those are the ones that they own. But they have to have some sort of other arrangement for a grant of rights for their road games in order to supplement the rest of the revenue that a team like Ohio State would get from their conference. Now, the trade-off is that Ohio State then has to go and share evenly amongst the other schools in their conference. I do believe that it is getting to a point where Notre Dame is sitting there and they're thinking to themselves, we are leaving money on the table by being associated with the ACC in our loose affiliation with them in a football sense, and then obviously with the other sports, versus potentially 2 other options. So let me walk through the options. Here's what I think Notre Dame, this is what's on the table for Notre Dame. I do believe that they can stay independent, maybe not for a long time, but at least for the near term. As long as they were to leave the ACC scheduling partnership that they have, they leave all their other sports, they basically leave the ACC, join the Big Ten in every other sport but football, and then get the loose scheduling agreement with the Big Ten.
Yeah.
I believe that they would garner enough revenue at that point where they could stay independent. There will become a time when that just is going to be moot and they're going to have to fold themselves into the Big Ten. There is an air of inevitability that Notre Dame will at some point be a Big Ten member. I just don't know if that's in the next 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years.